Thank you very much for coming. Nice to be here with you. So yeah, I don't normally have a compare, so thank you very much, Simon, for that intro. So yeah, I have done a few of these. I'm a director with the Medical Mediation Foundation. My name's Oscar Mathew. And I spend much of my time now working with and around clinical teams, focusing on helping them communicate better together. So I'm particularly interested, I suppose, in running this session. And what I thought we would do is that I would give you the material that I find resonates most with the clinical teams that I work with. So there's a little bit of kind of background theory around both team dynamics and communication. And then I've put together a small pack of the exercises that I run with clinical teams that you can then go away and do with your team. Now, I know some of you, if not all of you, will be leaders or managers within your particular context. So I hope this is really, this is kind of really helpful to you. You don't need to be a leader or a manager. You can go away and do this if you're not as well. So what I had planned for you is to do this. So talk to you first of all about team dynamics and communication and the relationship between team dynamics and communication. Then we're going to look at transparency, which is an interesting concept when it comes to both leadership and communication within clinical teams. There's a particular exercise called a communication recalibration that I do with teams that I can talk you through as well. And then I'm going to do a little bit on team communication preferences, which is understanding where people have preferences in a team and how you can work with those to help you communicate better. And then do some Q&A. And on the point of Q&A, I would love this to be, in as far as it can, interactive. So please do, as we go, pop things in the chat. There's a chat button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can pop your hand up as we go if you'd like, or think of a question that you'd like to talk through at the end. It's all good. So let's keep that dialogue flowing. So to start us off, to throw us in the deep end with some theory on this, this is Oshry's total system theory, which is, I think, particularly interesting. So Oshry says that in any organization, such as an NHS trust, there will be a variety of systems. And in those systems, you will see yourself as either somewhere near the top, somewhere near the middle, or somewhere near the bottom. So, for example, if you are the clinical lead of a particular service, you might see yourself at the top of that service. But in the hospital at large, maybe somewhere middle to the top. In the NHS as a kind of national body, maybe somewhere more towards the middle. But we will all be putting ourselves in systems all the time, seeing ourselves as somewhere near the top, middle, or the bottom. And where we see ourselves has an impact on how we feel about where we are. So if you are not in a good place as a team, if you're at the top, you are likely to feel isolated. If you're in the middle, you're likely to feel overloaded. And if you're towards the bottom, you're likely to feel disempowered. If things are not going well, that's how people in those areas tend to feel. But if you feel good and you're feeling good about the system, at the top, you'll feel connected. In the middle, you'll feel supported. And at the bottom, you'll feel involved. There's that nice story that you probably heard before about the person washing the floors on the Apollo space program. And a journalist says, what are you doing here? What's your job? And he said, I'm part of a mission putting somebody on the moon. So he was involved and connected beyond his particular role. So I often work with teams on that left-hand column, left-hand side of that pyramid, trying to help them move towards that right-hand side. And communication is interesting here because communication happens on both sides of this pyramid. But on the left-hand side, it tends to stick within its particular layer. So there's a lot of communication. There's a lot of talking in the hallway or on WhatsApp or in coffee shops, but it tends to stick either in the bottom, the middle, or the top. Whereas on the right-hand side, that communication flows both ways. There's a slightly more detailed slide here. But the idea here is that that right-hand side is a lot more connected. And I suppose the reason that that's interesting is on that left-hand side of the column, on the pyramid, you see this playing out here, which is an idea from Harvard. which is that we all make assumptions about people's intentions based upon its impact on us or its perceptions. So as we go about the world, we are aware of our own intentions and other people's impact on us, but we are unaware of other people's intentions and our impact on them. So if you imagine for a moment, you walk past a colleague's desk in the morning and you say, "Morning," and they don't respond. We don't go to, "Oh, they must not have heard me." We go to, "Is it something I've done?" So we project into that right-hand column what we fear might be there. And one of the things that I see working in and around healthcare systems, that I'm lucky to work throughout the system. So I work with groups of junior people all and senior teams as well, is that when things are not going well on that left-hand side of Oshrey's pyramid, there is an assumption that as people look up, that the people up at the top are holding information or not communicating or are doing things with a bit of subterfuge. And then you go up to that layer above, and not only do the people say, "Well, we're not holding on to that information," but they're also saying it about the people above them as well. So it becomes kind of stagnant. And I don't know whether that resonates or not with people listening to this, but it's what I see working with those different layers. But the reason that we've started today talk on communication, kind of delving into team dynamics, is because in order to be able to have really good communication in your teams, that second layer there, you need to be able to do layer one at the bottom, which is to have a sense of trust and inclusion and psychological safety. Because if you don't that, people are afraid to have those full, frank, difficult conversations with each other. So the first, I suppose, takeaway from this is that if you are looking to improve communication in your team, you don't start with the communication. You start with building that sense of inclusion as a group. This is Patrick Lencioni, by the way. You may be familiar with it if you've done kind of team dynamics training in the past. The idea here is that you need to build this pyramid incrementally. So you can't have good cohesive team behavior or clear roles and responsibilities that work if you don't have the layers below them. So the work that I often do with teams is helping them focus in on that bottom layer and helping that build a sense of psychological safety. It's a nice quote around this, which I want to share with you, which is from Brené Brown. If you're looking to build that bottom layer, she talks about trust a lot in her TED talk called The Power of Vulnerability. And she says this, that trust is the stacking and layering of small moments and reciprocal vulnerability over time. And that trust and vulnerability grow together. If you betray one, you destroy them both. But the research is clear that trust is built in those small moments. And I think that's a really key takeaway when we're looking at this, is that trust is a word that's made real by action. So it's what you do. It's not what you think inside, it's about how you behave. So if you're going to build great communication with your teams, it's about what you do and how you behave. Which is why our next port of call on this journey is the transparency question. So what does that mean you have to do? If you want to build that sense of inclusion and trust and psychological safety, what do you do? Well, there's a professor at Harvard called Amy Edmondson who wrote a lot about psychological safety, which is a sense of feeling like it's okay to say, "Hey, do you know what? I've made a mistake. Can you help?" A sense that you're not going to kind of be forced out, that you'll be embraced as a person in a group. And she said the best way to get at this is, as a leader in particular, to try and channel transparency in how you communicate. What does that mean? She had 5 different elements of transparency, but she said, in a nutshell, transparency is keeping people connected to the bigger picture. She said, when you're as a leader, when you're trying to navigate difficult times in particular, the number one task is transparency. And that means explaining to your team, this is what we know, this is what we don't know, and this is what we're trying to do to close that gap. And she said it closely aligns with other key facets of leading a team in particular, which are consistency, which is keeping your promises and acting fairly with people, and responsibility. That's being honest with people and not avoiding the difficult stuff. And interestingly, in the research literature on trust, consistency and reliability, responsibility are the key factors. So if you're going to do any one thing as a leader, it's not over-promising and under-delivering and being straight with people. She also tied in two other elements, which I think are quite interesting. There's humility, which is about being upfront with people about what you don't know. It's a real kind of power move, if you like, as a leader to say, this stuff is really hard. I don't know the answer. Can you help me? You know, these are the things that are challenging me. And aligning that with inspiration, which is really about articulating a sense of possibility and hope for people. Her full quote from her work on this was, task one is transparency, which is articulating to your team, here's what we know, here's what we don't, and here's what we're trying to do to close that gap. But the second, coming up swiftly behind it, is articulating a sense of possibility and hope for people. I mean, I think if you know, working with healthcare groups all the time, it's tough. It's tough at the minute in the context of in which people are working. So being able to say to people, you know, I'm alongside you, come with me. This is how we're going to try and navigate it. What can I do for you? Is a really powerful message. So there's a personal reflection piece that you can do here. And I mean, I'm talking about leadership here, but you don't need to necessarily be a leader to do this. The first thing to think about here is, what do you know and what can you share? Secondly, what don't you know? And are you being upfront with people about that? Are you managing to say to people, this is what I can share with you. This is what I can't, but I might be able to in the future. And this is what I just don't know. And can you work with me on that? People are going to want to know what you think, especially as a leader. And if you can be candid about the bits that you find challenging and about your thoughts, it can be really useful to people. And the last two here are linked. What do you need to do to help the team? And have you asked them? And how can the team help you? So these may not all be relevant to your personal situation right now, but these are the kind of things that Amy Edmondson encourages leaders in the healthcare to think through when they're thinking about communicating with their team. You can also move this on to a transparency team exercise, which I find to be a really, really useful thing to do with groups. Now, depending on where you are as a team, this will either be fairly straightforward or look very difficult. If you're in a place as a team where you feel like you can have this conversation, you can just pick this up and run with it, get together and talk about these questions. And it's really about, as a leader in particular, there can be a tendency to communicate in the manner that you like, in the format that you like, and in the frequency that you like. So if you like detail and you like email, you're likely to send detailed emails when you communicate. But is that right? And we're going to come along and look at that a little bit later when it comes to communication preferences. But it's opening up that conversation to the group that you work with and say, that's what I like, what works for you? And co-designing your communication strategy together. So questions like, what do we not get enough of? What do we get too much of? If we can make one change to how we do this, what would that be and what impact would it have? And then you can ask the team, how can I do this better? But also tell them, this is what I'd like from you. And when I say team, you can use this in a very, very stretchy way. This can be your consultant colleagues if you're a consultant. This can be your wider service, different logistical challenges around this. That if you're talking about a wider service, but these questions are the same. They're the same questions. A couple of things to note. You don't want to duck the difficult stuff. One of the things that you see in I think probably in all teams, but particularly in my world working with clinical teams, is undiscussable topics, or their big sibling undiscussable undiscussables, which things that are so difficult to talk about, the mere existence of them is off the table for people. So finding a way of bringing those into the room and for that to be okay is a real challenge. That's one of the things that I find I do a lot of work in with teams. The second is a practical one that you can use Mentimeter or applications like Mentimeter to gather anonymous opinions in one place. And it tends to be a really constructive and psychologically safe way to do that. Now, you may not be familiar with Mentimeter. I'll put a link in it in the email that you'll get after this. But what it'll give you is something like, and this is an example from work that I've done before. You can ask questions and get responses that are not linked to individual people. So if you want to gather information from your team to act on, this is a really nice way of doing it. It doesn't put people on the spot. So that's Amy Edmondson's transparency. I suppose the headline from transparency is acting in a way where you are as open as you can be about the things that you are able to be open about. And what it does is it challenges what you see on that Oshry pyramid on the left-hand side, where people are holding on to information and thinking that everybody else is also holding on to information and not sharing things, because it says, this is it. This is open, or as open as I can be about these things. Communication preferences is another way of going about this communication piece. Now, kind of, I suppose, a little health warning around this. This is based upon Myers-Briggs, or MBTI, that some of you will know. And I do Myers-Briggs a lot with clinical and scientific groups, and people have a variety of different responses to it. But what we're going to use it for is to give us a framework for a discussion around the different preferences that people have for how they like to communicate. For those of you who don't know, Myers-Briggs MBTI is a well-known, globally used personality preference tool. So the Myers-Briggs scales are in front of you there. So energy, information gathering, decision making, and lifestyle. And we're interested in particular in the center two here, information gathering and decision making, because they influence how we like to communicate. So information gathering, someone with a sensing preference for information gathering will be drawn to the detail. So if you show them a painting and ask them to describe it, they are likely to say there are 6 flags, 14 cars, a swimming pool, 12 boys, 6 girls. They'll be drawn to the literal, the factual. Someone with an N preference or an intuitive preference is more drawn to the general possibilities present in the picture. So they may say, there are cars there, but where are they going? There are children, but what are they off to go and do next? I wonder what the relationship is between the lifeguard and the person standing on the other side of the pool. So they're drawn towards relationships and future thinking. So that's one of the spectrums in Myers-Briggs. The other is decision making, which is around thinking or feeling. People with a thinking preference, if you ask them, say you run a football team and you have 3 tickets to the World Cup final, but 12 people who want to go, how do you decide who goes? Someone with a thinking preference will say, the only possible, logical, fair way of doing this will be to take the names, put everyone's name in the hat and pick one out. Whereas someone with a feeling preference will say, well, who's had the hardest year? Who deserves it the most? Who's the most interested? And so they'll apply a value judgment to it. And so a T or an F preference accordingly. Now I can go into a lot more detail with Myers-Briggs, but those are the 2 spectrums that dictate how we tend to like to communicate. So S or N and T and F. And this is how it plays out. Someone with an S preference, so a precision preference, and a T preference, a thinking preference, will likely be drawn to practical matter-of-fact things. So they'll want to communicate by emphasizing detailed facts. They'll be drawn towards the literal. So someone with an ST preference may like, for example, detailed written emails with specific things in them. Someone with an SF preference will tend to be drawn to detail, but details about people. So in an office move, for example, someone with a strong SF preference would be saying, I need to know where I'm going to sit because I need to sit next to the person I was sitting next to before. So be drawn towards those people relationships, but it'd be about detail. NT preferences are around big picture possibilities. So communicating by emphasizing strategic possibilities. Analytical tend to be big picture. A lot of NTs at the senior end of organizations. And finally, NF preference, people who are N, so they're intuitive, but also F, so they're feelings focused. So they're about big picture, but people. So you can distill these down as those four things: practical details, strategy, human stories, or dream. They need to be sold, the dream of where we're going. Office move, what's going to happen? Paint me a picture. And there are some interesting gender balance differences here. So 42% of men would see themselves as ST, whereas only 6% of women would see themselves as an NT strategy person, which is interesting. And you may well be sitting here thinking, well, I'm kind of a little bit of a few things, and that's perfectly possible as well. But the question that I would be inviting you to ask yourself here is there one area that I probably feel more comfortable in than the others? If so, what is it? And if, actually, why don't we pop that? I'd be interested. If you've got the chat in front of you there, you've got the chat box. Can you tell me which one you think you belong in most? Is it ST, NT, SF, or NF? Where do you see yourself most comfortably sitting in how you like to communicate? As you're responding to that, I'll take you through a little bit more detail around them. ST people, interested in how things will get done, bottom line, precision, practical results, desire to get it right first time. And I can show you these slides if you're interested in a bit more detail around it. SF kind of tend to be committed to kind of patient service, striving to help others, and are all about how facts relate to people. So it has a preciseness, but it's a people-related preciseness. NTs are all about possibility, theoretical concepts, principles, systems thinkers. And NFs, much kind of open, thinking about, sell me the story, where am I going, I need to feel empowered, etc. So that's and this framework tends to speak to some people more than others. Some people think, I finally feel seen for the first time in my life. Other people thinking, I kind of feel I move around this a little bit more. But what this can do for you is, if we go back to this box here, if you look diagonally opposite where your preference lies, Myers-Briggs would say that that is the area where you are likely to be focusing the least attention. So the challenge for you as a leader with a group which will have all of these different preferences in is to think, am I communicating in the style that I like, at the expense of communicating in the style that others like? And what might I be able to do that speaks to the other boxes that are present there? Thank you, everybody, for putting your preferences in there. So it's got quite a lot of SFs, STs, etc. Thank you. And then Milena, thank you. Not sure how this all fits in clinical life. Well, this is what you can do with it. And the reason that I like doing this with clinical teams is it's a really helpful way of encouraging a team to talk about its difference without it being too intense. If there are kind of the rumblings of dissatisfaction in a team, it can be quite a big deal to just get in front of people and say, let's talk about how you communicate. This gives a vocabulary around difference without people feeling exposed. And this is the kind of thing that you can absolutely go away and do with your team if you want to. So and you're very welcome, take the slides that I've shown you, draw up those preference pairs on a board. You don't need to know more than than I've described, and ask the team to indicate in the same way that I have, where they see themselves. Where are you drawn towards? Where are you most comfortable? And what that will do will be to give you a platform for a discussion around those questions there. What's this telling us about our communication preferences together? When we communicate, what does that mean we might need to do? How can we make this better meet the needs of everybody here? What could we do differently? What change would make the most difference, and what impact would that have? So it's quite a simple but effective way of engaging people in that conversation around difference and communication preference. When we're talking about that need to encourage trust and inclusion, psychological safety, what does that mean you do, especially as a leader? Some ideas. If you remember from that slide, with the marble jar, if I'll go back to the marble jar, it's all about behavior. It's all about how you treat each other. And she has this really nice example from her daughter's elementary school class in the States, where the teacher has a marble jar on her front desk. I'm sure you probably remember this from the book. Teacher has a marble jar on the front desk, and every time one of the kids does something that makes one of the other children feel included or part of the greater whole, they put a marble in the marble jar. And that whenever any of the kids experiences something from another child which makes them feel isolated or vulnerable, alone, they take a marble out of the jar. And the idea is that you can see that rising and falling of trust within the group represented with the marbles in the jar. So it's all about what you do and how you treat each other. And so the first one there that she has in her book is around credibility. Can other people tell by my behavior that I have their best interests at heart? And the two that I mentioned earlier on that are indicated in the research literature, reliability and consistency. Do you do what you say you're going to do? And do people know what they're going to get when they deal with you? When they kind of knock on your door or walk into your room, do they know what they're going to get on the other side? You mentioned this one just now, Vault. Essentially, how well do you hold information or experiences that aren't yours to share? The next two I think are kind of linked. Integrity and courage. Are you clear on your values, and are you courageous in standing up for them? Are you choosing what's right over what's easy? I think probably easier said than done, those two. But if people see you behaving in that way, it generates trust. And finally, and I like this one, I think it's particularly important, perhaps, that sense of cohesion. Does your team feel like you're on this journey together? Are you doing this together, or are you pointing the way? Just in general conversation with people in healthcare, one of the things people say they see is, oh yeah, I know the person who runs the hospital, but I've never spoken to them. They've never stopped and said hi. They never made that time to make that connection with me. And obviously, if you've got a trust, if you're running a trust of 14,000 people, how do you do that? But there's something so powerful in just that stopping and talking. I went, I teach on a course up in Oxford, and one of the speakers we had on was the chair of Oxford University Hospitals, and he says he basically spends his entire time walking around, just saying to people, how are you doing? What are you seeing? What's tough? And I thought that was really something.